Hey, I'm Jono Bacon. I'm a community strategy consultant and author of People Powered: How Communities Can Supercharge Your Business Brand and Teams. If you've got an email list or a social media account, it's not going to cut it for much longer. Your competitors are going to eat your lunch if you do not have a community. And on today's show, we're going to talk about exactly how to do that. Stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, he's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. Let me ask you, what do you need to do to up-level your leadership? Have you considered how you could tap into and build communities to supercharge your business, your brand, and your teams? Well, stay tuned because that's exactly where we're going on today's show. I'm your host, Dov Baron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes and transforms everything by transforming meaning into action. To find out more, you can go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. This episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to you in part by our other podcast, Curiosity Bites. Curiosity Bites is the answer to the question, how can we bring people together who completely disagree? This is exactly what your heart, your mind, and your soul have been craving. It's your chance to sit in on some real and oftentimes pretty intense conversations with some of the world's most interesting people, including astronauts, neuroscientists, philosophers, holy people, quantum physicists, skeptics, entrepreneurs, Grammy award-winning entertainers, and some folks you might think you'd completely disagree with who you will find truly fascinating. Simply go to dovbaron.com and find out how you can sign up for and sink your teeth in the delicious Curiosity Bites. As always, you can find both of those podcasts on our Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever it is that you tune into podcasts. We always need your help in staying relevant, so please get over there and do us a favor. Tune in, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. If you are a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. We're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. Of course, you can find both of our shows on Google Home and Alexa by simply saying, play Dov Baron podcast. All right. Thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Let's strip it down and dive right in. Maybe you are old enough to remember when teens hung out, and so did the older generation who got their exercise there, at the mall. Well, as you are no doubt aware, malls were dying long before the 2020 pandemic. Today, they are on their last belabored breath. Do you care? Well, unless you're a big box store, probably not. But there was something about malls that went beyond shopping, and that was community. People met in the food courts. People went for their exercise if they were older. There was a place to hang out. There was a community there. We gathered. The mall community was very good for business. But as malls disappear, how can we build communities that grow our businesses? Well, that's exactly where we're going. See, my guest on today's show is Jono Bacon. He is the author of an award-winning book called People Powered: How Communities Can Supercharge Your Business, Your Brand, and Teams, as well as 4 other books. Jono Bacon is the leading community and collaborator speaker, author, and podcaster. He is a columnist for Forbes and OpenSource.com, founder of the Community Leadership Summit, founder of Conversations with Bacon, and founder of Bad Voltage. He is an advisor to AlienVault, Moltin, data.world, Mycroft, Open Networking Foundation, and Open Cloud Consortium. He works as a consultant with clients from startups like HackerOne, Mattermost, Digital Assets, and others, and major organizations like Inc., Santander, Deutsche Bank, Intel, Microsoft, and a couple of others. So, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the master of community building, the Grand Northern Lad, Jono Bacon!
That is the most incredible intro I think I've ever experienced on a podcast, Dov. Thank you very much.
From one Northern lad to another.
I know, we've done well, haven't we? We scrub up well.
Lovely, lad. Welcome. It's right nice to have you here.
It's lovely to be here. Lovely to be here.
Lovely. Thanks, Duck.
Some of your listeners are going to have no idea what we're talking about.
You know, I had a guest on my show a long time ago, Ian Rowland. I don't know if you know who Ian is.
No.
But he's an Englishman too, and he's also from Yorkshire.
Right.
And we both spoke at the Human Hacking Conference together last year.
Right.
And the person who runs that conference, owns the conference, was so enamored by our accents that we could play it that he wanted us to do 10 minutes on stage just talking Lancashire and Yorkshire. And that's what we did. And people were like, is this English?
You know, it's been a lot easier recently, I think, because when I'd say I was born in Yorkshire, they say, what does that accent sound like? And now I can say Game of Thrones. Watch Game of Thrones, and that's basically a northern accent.
Yeah, that's very true, actually. Yeah.
So, yeah, popularized it.
Yeah, that's actually very true. Although both of us have got a little bit of a bastardization to our accents, having lived away for a long time.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Jono, one of the places I like to start the show is by asking, you know, in this world of influencers where everybody's an expert and an influencer, just look on Instagram if you don't know. Who is someone we might not know or might not even consider has been a major influence on you and on your leadership?
Wow, there's a few.
I'm sure.
I mean, one person that really kind of switched on a light bulb for me is Rory Sutherland, who's at Ogilvy. Some years ago, I've been working and building communities for a while, and one of the things I find fascinating about this is that it's understanding the real deep motivations of why people make decisions and why people collaborate together, which obviously you spend a lot of time working on. And I learned about behavioral economics through Rory Sutherland. He did an amazing TED talk called Confessions of an Ad Man. And that really sent me down this rabbit hole of what is the role of psychology and how we come together as people and the driving forces behind it. So he's definitely one person, but, you know, Seth Godin as well. I mean, obviously Seth Godin is fairly well known, but the thing I like about Seth Godin isn't so much his teachings, it's more of his approach, this fundamental focus on service, that if you're of service to other people, then good things will happen to you. And when you weave that through everything that you do, I think great things happen.
So when you put those two people or those things that you learned from them together, what's central for you?
I think what's central to me is that, you know, when I'm working with clients and when I'm just going on podcasts and whatever else, often people want to talk about what is the tech behind communities and why should we be building them? But to me, fundamentally, we were animals, right? And if we take away the computers, the screens, the cell phones, there is a very fundamental blueprint to what it's like to be human. And and I find that the people who are able to zone in on what that is and then tie the tactical decisions to that blueprint get better results. So, you know, when Seth Godin's talking about being of service, that's because fundamentally reciprocity is important to us. Forming into communities is important to us. When Rory Sutherland talks about the psychology of why we make decisions, that kind of section one part of our brain that drives so many of our sentient decision making, then we get better results. The thing that worries me is when we see all of these marketing gurus and leaders and all they're talking about is open and click rates and this, that, and the other. I think we're getting away from what's really critical. So to me, that's the most important element.
Yeah, that's powerful because as you said, we are tribal. We need to connect, we need to communicate and finding a place where we can do that safely. And that's the interesting thing I find about communities is, you know, people talk a lot about Proud Boys and all these other groups that are springing up. And they say, you know, this new phenomenon. I go, it's not a new phenomenon. I was investigating this in the late 80s and people were like, really? And I go, yeah, the only difference was they didn't have a megaphone where they were in a safe place to do it. So if you've got a group in Facebook and you can pay to bring people in, use your megaphone and have a safe place for people to say things that others would think of as crazy,
Right.
then it works. And it's that safe place of community. And that's where I really want to go with you
Yeah.
a lot in today. But let's just talk, first of all, the book is called People Powered.
Yep.
And I know it's not, it's, you've written multiple books before, and they're all sort of in the same vein around,
Yeah.
people and community, etc. So let's just go to that for a minute. Let's just go to, why, first of all, why did you feel like you needed to put that book out, People Powered? Because you've been
Yes.
talking about community before.
For a while, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a very specific purpose. So the little bit of backstory here is that back in 2008, I wrote this book called The Art of Community, and it was published by O'Reilly. Where I was at the time was I was working for a company called Canonical, very deeply involved in technology communities. And there wasn't really a blueprint for how to do that. So I wrote my thesis for how to go and build communities. And I intended it to be that big career book that we all want, that people pick up in airports. And
Yep.
it ended up being an incredibly nerdy technical manual for how to build communities. And it did quite well. But it went through 2 editions, primarily a technical audience. And so when I started consulting full time about 5 years ago, I'd have, executives in companies say, "Oh, I bought your book. I'm looking forward to reading it." And I'd think, hang on a second, this is 500 pages long. You're going to get lost within 15 pages. It's not written for you. A different book needs to be written for executives who are trying to understand the value of community, why they should care, how they do it logically, and how they do it in a cross-functional way in their businesses. And that was the goal of People Powered. But I knew that I needed to write a business book, and I won't get into the nerdy details of publishing. I mean, I know you know this stuff because you've written books, but writing a business book is a completely different proposition from you need an agent, and you need to be very, very clear on a high level blueprint that someone can take away within a very short space of time, which is about 280 pages. So it was actually a very challenging book to write because I had a lot to cram in there, because I was starting from the premise that someone is familiar with the concept of community, but it's an ambiguous word. It can mean anything from a knitting circle to the Proud Boys. And how do we take that curiosity and then really output something that you can practically work with? Because the thing that bugs me about business books is the amount of books I've read, and they talk about one kind of core principle in each chapter, and then you get to the end of the book and you think, okay, well, that was fascinating, but what now? And I didn't want that. I wanted a very specific blueprint, which is what I do when I'm working with clients that people could use.
So, the first book was the nerdy book. In People Power, do you feel like that gives people that blueprint? In a sort of practicality way?
It does. And I think it does it at an appropriate level. Like, People Powered won't tell you which forum platforms, which incentives platforms you need to use or anything like that. It's really intended to say, who is my audience? What is the value proposition that I want to deliver for them? And then how do I create a set of objectives, a set of goals with the right kind of incentives, the right kind of rewards, the right kind of collaborative framework where I can achieve that success for those audience members. So it's kind of, it's not I wouldn't say it's a visionary book, because I didn't want to write that.
Right.
It's got vision in it, but that's not its sole focus. It's not a tactical book. It's that middle ground it's really a strategic book. And
so how did you come to be focused in community? Because, you have a background, we can go into that a little bit, but
right.
why community? I mean, that seems like it's a new animal in the world of business, right?
Yeah.
So why there? How did you end up there? What, you tripped over and fell into a community? What happened?
Pretty much.
It took a while to wipe it off your shoes. What happened?
It took longer than you'd expect. When I was 18, I was living at home with my parents before I went off to university, and I was getting into this technology platform called Linux, which is now very, very popular. It runs all of the infrastructure in the world, but back then no one knew what it was. I went and bought a book about Linux. There was only one book that was available, and the first chapter in this book talked about how people from all over the world came together on the internet to create this software together, which was quite a weird concept back then. And I thought the tech was interesting, but I was just captivated by this notion of people collaborating together on something that they all shared. Now, I think part of the reason for that was back in the late 90s, certainly in the UK, um, access to the internet was not prevalent. So just
No.
the internet in itself was fascinating, let alone people who've never met each other working together. So I was fascinated by that. I didn't really know why. It was one of those things where I was interested in it and I wasn't sure why that was. And then I realized over the next couple of years, as I went to university and became like a typical altruistic student, that the reason why I find this fascinating is because I think it's how we bring the best out of us as human beings. Like fundamentally, a community is a network of minds, and every mind has, I mean, look at your audience, for example. Everyone who's watching and listening to this has got experiences, skills, perspectives, ideas that are fascinating in a vacuum. But when you bring those perspectives, ideas, and time together, and you've got a common goal, whether it's great leadership, whether it's pulling that kind of potential inside of people out of them, then we get much better results. And I didn't know that back then, but as I kind of delve more into it, I realized that. But what I did realize earlier on, and this is why I wrote The Art of Community initially, no one really knows how to do this. Everyone's just kind of guessing and having a go at it. And as I'm sure you know, Dov, like so many people, they need a framework that they can operate on, so they can get more predictable results. When, especially if you're a business leader, and my world is about community, but if you're a business leader, your world is about your business. It's not just about community. So
No.
that's why I thought it was so important.
It's interesting. I had mentioned this to you in a previous conversation that I, in my last business book, which was called Fiercely Loyal, I talked about the 4 C's: cooperation, collaboration, contribution, and community.
Yeah.
And I had put community at the end and saying that your business needs to create a community for your people and for your industry, etc. Excuse me, and where your bricks and mortar were, if you're a bricks and mortar business. But even in the last year and a half, maybe just before the pandemic, I was talking about how actually the order has to be reversed, that you need to build a community first and put your business in it rather than the business building a community. Am I whacked? Does that make sense in the context of what it is you're doing? Help us out. Maybe I was smoking a fat one.
No, I think that's a really intuitive observation. And I think you're 100% right. Like when for example, I write about this in People Power, but also when I'm working with clients, the conversation always begins with value and to understand the value, who you're creating the value for. And most businesses quite naturally are like, what do I get out of this? And often that's why the idea of building a community is triggered by them. But before, it doesn't take too long to identify, okay, well, if we create amazing value for our audience, we're clear on what that value is, and we relieve their pain points, we break down their roadblocks, the creation of that value will bring good things to your business. And that's the Seth Godin thing again. So I think if you go into creating a community from a very business-centric perspective, people have got BS radars, right? They know that that ultimately this is probably going to result in an unwanted sales process. Whereas if you go into it and you say, I'm focusing on you, the business is separate, then you build a long-lasting relationship. And I think what's interesting is it's been interesting to kind of contrast this with marketing. Like in the since the pandemic kicked off, I've been really focusing a lot on digital marketing and learning about it because I'm building kind of like a training side of my business. So I've been watching like a lot of these marketing gurus. And one of the things that has been unsettling about watching these marketing gurus is that they focus so heavily on short-term rewards, like these sensational headlines and promises and offers.
And look at me in this video. I'm standing next to a girl with her boobs hanging out, and I'm on a private jet. Yeah, hey, look at my garage.
Exactly, all of these cars and whatever else. And I've always found that kind of a bit weird, because to me, if you build the long-term relationship and invest in that relationship, you get such better results. But I think that it doesn't have that immediate gratification or that immediate sale. And that's a difficult thing to get over to, I think, a lot of businesses, especially startups where it's all boom and bust. They got to kind of get through as quickly as possible and build that growth.
Well, that's what I was just going to say to you, Jono, is how do you communicate that across? Because they're going, okay, we've got this much in our budget for marketing.
Yeah.
We've got this much in our budget for sales. We got this much in our market, and you want us to put a big budget into building this community, and you want us to not focus on a payoff. So it's all out, and we are supposed to hope that that transforms into sales and loyalty. And so walk us through a bit, because I'm sure that there are many of our audience who are listening or watching and saying, yeah, it sounds lovely, but you know, I don't have $100,000, just making up a number. It could be whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
I don't have $100,000 to throw into creating a community that might pay off.
Right. Exactly. So this is the approach that I take, and this is what I'd recommend your viewers and listeners do. And again, this is outlined in People Power, but you can do this elsewhere. So first of all, define who your audience is, define their pain points, their roadblocks, because people are much more responsive to their pain being relieved.
Yeah.
So for example, let's say you've got a product, let's say you've got a software product, a SaaS service, creating a community where people can go and they can learn about it, they can solve their problems, they can build relationships with people. What I'd recommend you do is to think about the next 12 months and say, what do we need to put in place in the lowest, simplest possible way to deliver that value? And that could be a Facebook group, or it could be an email list. It could be a series of Zoom conversations. But you identify, what are we going to do in the next year to do that? And then you start with the low hanging fruit. And you focus on some of those most critical pieces of just getting started. Like there are some companies and they think, oh, I've got to go and bring in these big platforms and hire all these staff. You don't need to do that. Start simple and then build from that. But the reason why I recommend you create the 12-month plan is that you want to think through the process, because all too often people who think about communities think, I'm just going to go and set up a Slack channel, or I'm going to go and set up a Facebook group. And that's all they think about. One of the things I walk through in People Powered is the way to make this work is that you make it a journey. So if you think about when you go to Disney World, from how you show up and park your car to how you buy your tickets to where you go around the park and where the parades are at what time, it's designed by Disney to maximize the guest experience and get as many people through the gate as possible. Too many people, when they build communities, just say, I've set up a forum or a Slack channel, go there and we'll go and hang out as a community. But we need to think through the process of how do you onboard people when they're brand new? How do you give them incentives to keep them coming back? When they're regulars, how do you connect them with other people so they can generate value? And then how do you really recognize that people who are very passionate about that? And that's kind of the model that I've developed over the years. But the key thing
it's
is
not just building the community, it's building the journey of onboarding and being with and experiencing the value of that community.
Yeah. And doing it in like I say, low hanging fruit. Like I've worked with many startups, for example, where they've got part of one person's time to do this. And I think with the right kind of guidance and mentoring, and it doesn't have to just come from me, it can come from anybody else. You can actually get amazing results with very little in terms of resources, but it's all about that intentionality.
One of the things you say in the book is that communities are changing the way we come together, the way we solve problems, and we do business. I think that has always been true. I don't think that it's new, but it's the form of communities which are now tending, certainly since the pandemic of 2020, certainly the form of those communities has changed. It's become digital. It's become remote. Talk to us a little bit about how those digital and remote communities are coming together to solve problems and do business.
Yes, I think one thing that's interesting, if we zoom out a little bit for a minute, is if you look at the relationship, how between a consumer and a business or a brand has changed. Like years ago, in the early days of business, I'm not talking about 100 years ago, but back in the 80s, for example, if you had an issue or you wanted to ask a question, you had to call someone on the phone.
Yep.
When the internet became a thing, it was primarily a broadcast mechanism. You'd subscribe to someone's email list and then they'd send you email, but you wouldn't really have a conversation with that company.
No.
And with the advent of social media, celebrities, companies became much more addressable. But it's like having a conversation with someone a mile away. Like it's not an authentic kind of relationship. It's a very transactional relationship in many ways. Now, I think what's happened is that as technology has evolved, and now we've got generations of people growing up with social technology, with Instagram, with Facebook, with Twitter, they're expecting a collaborative relationship with the brands and the companies and the people who they care about.
Mm-hmm.
So this is why I think communities have become of increased importance and relevance to companies, because they know that sending people a bunch of email isn't cutting it anymore. Just posting things on Twitter isn't cutting it anymore. That people want an interactive experience. So to give you an example, Fitbit, they've got a huge community that's been very successful. The majority of the conversation that happens there isn't about Fitbits. It's about running and intermittent fasting and getting a swim in stride and whatever else. Essentially, Fitbit has created an environment where what their customers care about isn't their devices. It's
No.
how their devices solve their problems and further their goals, which is better fitness and health. So I think that is one thing that's definitely changed. And since we've seen this advent of social technology and online collaborative tools, on one hand, it's created an opportunity. And we saw this with COVID, where a lot of businesses are now thinking, oh, I can do remote working and I can build this more online relationship with my audience. But then it creates this decision paralysis of where on earth do I begin? Like, is a community a social media account? Is it a forum? Is it a Slack channel? Is it something else? And how do I mix that with my marketing team? And how do I mix that with my product team and whatever else? So I think that's where we've had this paralysis that's been occurring. But there's no doubt that the train has left the building, and we're absolutely seeing that growth happening.
Yeah, and to address exactly what you just said, for the novice in that world, this whole idea seems complex.
Mm.
How do I find the right people? Because it's like when COVID hit, I got probably 40 requests in the first 2 weeks for people who want to come on and be guests, talking about how they can teach you remote leading. How long have you been remote leading? A week. Well, yeah, I'm thinking no, thanks.
maybe no.
All right. So it's the same thing with this. I mean, there's going to be people who are showing up, like there were social media experts who showed up, and now, of course, there are many, but there were some who just showed up not knowing what the heck they were doing. I know one of the biggest in the world, the most successful. I knew her when she wrote her first ebook on Facebook, and it was $99 and it was terrible. I asked for my money back and I knew her. Like I was a friend. Now she's spectacular. Don't get me wrong. But it's the same thing. I have the sense of the same thing with community, Jono, is that it seems rather complex to build. Okay, I'm in overwhelm. Let's find somebody who's a community builder online. Oh, I can do that. How many have you done? Well, I did one for my mate in with a bike shop. Okay.
Yeah.
So we do get that paralysis. It's that right blend of technology and psychology. How do we get started? I guess, for the person who is in overwhelm, is like, I like the idea of this, but I'm just not even sure I could go there.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you asked that, because I remember when I was at X Prize, Peter Diamandis, who founded X Prize, said just one. I love it when people just say one sentence in a conversation, just off the cuff, and it really gets your brain turning. And he said, you know what, Jono? Life is not about having all of the answers. It's about having the right answers that are packaged up well, which I think he was 100% right about. And that was without shilling people power too much. That's one of the reasons why, again, why I wanted to create it was to create a simple way of getting started, because I think that's what most people want. They don't necessarily need all of the decisions made. They just need a place to get started. So define the value, define the pain points, start carving out, know the different pieces of that journey and start carving them out, and then measure it and see what kind of results you get. One of the things that I think the marketing crowd has really done really well is being able to weave these very complicated marketing funnels and measure every step of the process. Like, okay, what's my webinar conversion rate, and how many people show up to the session? When do they drop off? So they've been able to do that really effectively. And I essentially take a very similar approach with communities. Is start simple, just do one thing and learn from it, and then go from there. Because then you get your not particularly good, ebook experience out the way, and then you learn and grow from there. But that's what's in people power. But like I say, there's lots of information out there. I don't want people to feel like the only place they can get it is from me.
No. So then we come to the next piece of this, which is, okay, that's about the community.
Yeah.
And I've seen this, and I can probably say I was guilty of it. I built a community 14 years ago when nobody was doing it. It was an online learning community. I had all kinds of great stuff in there, and 6 or 7 people showed up, and that was pretty much it.
Right.
I mean, not literally, but pretty damn close. It died a death. It was way too early. I was way beyond what was happening.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how to be a leader in that environment. I didn't know. I mean, I could lead, but I didn't know I felt like it felt to me a bit like herding cats. So in many ways, this is communities are groups of people, different ideas, different approaches, experiences. I want to know about, how do you put the leadership into that? And is that, for the leader listening, watching, saying, oh God, another freaking job?
So I think to explore this, I just want to cover one quick thing of why, what is essential in good communities, and that's momentum. So
Right.
to make a comparison, do you remember before we had COVID when we'd have parties at our houses? And let's say,
a long time ago.
Remember that? Remember airplanes?
Ooh,
So,
aren't they science fiction?
Imagine you're in California, I'm having a party, and you show up at my house with a friend, right? Or actually, you just show up by yourself, and then somebody else shows up. What I'm going to do as the host is connect you and that other person and try and find something in common with you two, so you two can start talking. And then I'll go to 2 other people who don't know each other and connect them and find a conversation, lighten these little conversational fires. And then before you know it, everybody gets comfortable, the gin starts flowing, and then we're having a good time. We have to do the same thing with communities. So, at the beginning of a community, you've got all of these individuals who are not connected. And part of it is giving them a great experience, lots of value, but also getting them to know each other. Because when we feel like we know the social circle that we're in, then we feel that sense of belonging, and that builds retention. Now, what I always recommend to people is you need to do that for at least 2 months, because it takes 2 months to build a habit. So if you map out that 2-month experience, people keep coming back, they get to know each other, then they're more likely to come back. And that's how you build your growth. Now, the role of leadership in this is broken into 2 areas. One is we mimic our leaders, right? So
Of course.
we've seen this politically and elsewhere.
No, not a signs of that.
If you have bad leaders, then you're going to get bad behavior, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So there is a responsibility for leadership to kind of come in and set the stage and set the example. And that can be difficult with companies because, like you say, leaders are really busy. They've got other things to do. So having a structured way of doing it, like one of the things I often recommend is 3 times a week for 15 minutes, I want you to go into our community, respond to a couple of things, and share one conversation starter. That's it. Just go and ask people what their favorite TED Talks are, whatever it might be. But your participation is going to be essential in making people feel like this is a place that's relevant and comfortable to them. But then the other element, and this is leadership probably at a more tactical level, is having the right people to go in there and start those conversational fires and connect people together. And that's usually what a community manager will do. The tricky thing that companies need to be aware of is an anti-pattern that happens all the time is that a company thinks, I want to set up a community. They go and hire a community manager to come in and start building this out. And then that community manager becomes like an ambassador for the company to the community. The employees think, oh, the community manager, Sarah, she's got that figured out. She's got that covered. I'll go back to my day job and do what I do. If you do that, it will not work because your customers want to talk to your employees. They want to talk to you. They don't just want to talk to your community manager. No matter how nice he or her may be, they want to talk to you. So systematizing the community as a part of your business is critical. You know, like for example, one of the first clients I had when I started consulting full time was an amazing security company called HackerOne, and their CEO is this guy called Mycroft, who previously sold MySQL to Sun for $1 billion, like very successful entrepreneur. And he said when he came in day one, he said, our community, he said, I don't care whether you're an executive or whether you're sweeping the floor, everybody in this company has to have a relationship with our community. And that, so from the top down, it became part of the value of the company. And then that's how you get much better results.
Yeah, and I can certainly see that with a new hire. Like it's part of the new hire process. Okay, you're expected to spend 15 minutes a day inside of our community. Okay,
right.
All right, good. But now you've also got Fred, who's been working with the company for 15 years, who's like, yeah, I don't do that. I don't do social media. I've never been online. I don't know what any, you know. And so how do you, because you're selling the community to potentially unknown people, and you're also selling it to people who are already in your organization. And in many ways, this is the thing I wanted to get to, is in many ways, it's like trying to sell social media to people, to business 20 years ago. Was like, what are you talking about? Because I am old enough to remember the internet before Internet 2.0. That's what social media was before it was called social media. It was called Internet 2.0, which was interactive. There was just the internet, right? You sent me emails and you put up a page and that was it. But it was no interaction at all. You got 2.0, which was this interaction. And it was like, oh my God, you want me to go on there and talk to people and do this and have no. So there was a ton of resistance. Of course, the people who got in early did well, but it's the same thing here. I feel like that is how it is with community. I feel like, honestly, John, when you and I talked about it, and what I written about in the book was, I feel like this is 5 years down the road. This is like, of course, we have a community.
Yeah.
But before that, everybody's got their foot on the brake, not even on the accelerator on the brake, just on the brake. Oh my God, I'm in overwhelm. I'm too tired. I'm too exhausted. There's too many things to do. And now you want me to go build a community. You want me to not only go build a community, but go in there and talk to these numbnuts who are talking to me about stuff I'm not interested in and I don't really care about. Because I remember when Twitter came out and I was like, I don't care what you had for breakfast. I'm certainly not going to tell you what I had for breakfast. I don't care. And then, you suddenly realize, oh my God, this is a massive business tool.
Right.
How are you getting people over that hump, that psychological hump that's saying it's just another time suck, and God knows there's too many already?
So I think there's kind of a strategic response, and then there's a more tactical response. I think from a strategic level, a lot of it is very common when I'm working with companies that there'll be members of the company who will be very resistant. They don't like the idea of this. And I think when it's reframed as like, what is the most valuable asset that you have as a business? It's not your products. It's not your team. It's your customers. It's those
no customers, no team, no product. Nothing.
Exactly. Your VC money will only get you so far, right? So I think when it's reframed as this is an investment in the relationship that we have with our current customers and our future customers, it opens the conversation up into a more practical setting. But fundamentally, I think if there's one thing we've learned in recent years with so much noise and distraction on the internet is asking people to do something will only get you so far. They've got to intrinsically want to do it for their own reasons. And that's why I've belabored this point about audiences and clear value for them and solving their pain points. And we need to do the same thing for employees. I think there is a responsibility in the company having its employees play a role in that community, but there's got to be a good reason for it, and that can be as simple as it's recognized as part of your as part of your performance review. Not necessarily that you discipline people who don't join the community, but you recognize people, you celebrate them for doing that. Like one of the things that's very common when I'm working with companies is the executives in like company-wide memos saying thank you to Sherry for the amazing contributions to our community and blah, 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 and getting very visible public recognition. So it creates that social structure to say, okay, well, maybe I should go and do what Sherry is doing. I want that
Right.
kind of recognition. So I think, I think that's one element of it. But, then there is just the tactical level of creating a habit within the teams for how you go about doing that. And that's where, again, you don't want one person to be the ambassador. There's been companies I've worked with that I've said, you have to completely rewire this. You will not build any kind of growth unless you create an environment where your employees want to spend time there and where they're celebrated and they're recognized for spending time there, in the same way that they're celebrated and recognized for responding to their emails and to feeding into the projects and to improving various metrics that are defined in their goals. Right, we need to do the same thing with community.
So you've been doing this for a while now. If you sort of step back a bit and look at the business world,
yeah,
what percent, so everybody who's in business today has a social media platform. Everybody.
yeah,
right? If you're a one-man show started last week, you've got a Twitter account. If you're Coca-Cola, you've got a Twitter account, right? I'm just using Twitter as one example.
Yes.
So, as I said before, it's a world that didn't exist even as little as 10 years ago that now it's automatic. I got to have that. What percentage of people are real, or businesses are really grasping this community thing is an imperative to your business today, as we record this in 2021?
Yeah. So what's been fascinating, I mean, I've been doing this for 20 years now.
Right.
And I promise you, this is the truth. This is the kind of thing that people would lie about on a podcast, but I promise you that this is the truth. Especially in the last 2 years, the level of interest and focus on community has gone through the roof. And I think part of the reason for that is, first of all, the tools and the technology is becoming better known and people have got a better sense of it. But more importantly, the thing I mentioned earlier on about that expectation from customers and consumers about that relationship with your business, people have just been outclassed, by their competitors with this. And then you hear these incredible success stories, like SAP have got 2 million people in their community. You've got Harley Davidson, 1,700 local user groups around the world. Salesforce, a huge community. And then you get public stories like Joseph Gordon-Levitt, the Emmy award-winning actor. I met him at a conference that we were both speaking at, and he contributed some content to People Powered. He built a community where artists can come together to create productions, and many of which have been at Sundance. So I think we're seeing the kind of the celebrity element to this, as well as the business element to this. And I think it's really pushing it forward. But one thing I do want to cover very quickly, because I meant to mention this earlier on, that I think is relevant to this as well, is that, and this is less well known in businesses, so I think people who are listening to this is definitely an early track,
right?
Is that when you design a community the right way and you've nurtured them, when you've got that engagement, you can have your community members create value for your business, right? So to give you an example, there's a company that I've been working with for about a year and a half. And we built this journey, like I've already talked about. And when people have been participating for about a couple of months and they're actively involved, at that point, we reach out to them and we ask them if they'd be interested in doing one thing. And that is contributing a small piece of content to a knowledge base that they've got. Probably 90% of people, something like 90 or 92% of people say yes. And we guide them through the process of doing that. And then we celebrate what they've done. We celebrate their contribution in the community and beyond. Now they feel like they created something that added value to the community. And now they feel like a creator. And what's interesting then is that then you're spanning beyond your available resources in your company. If you've got 50 people in your company, you're limited to those 50 people in terms of what you can do. But when you convert your audience members into creators, then you can start doing incredible things. That's when you can create written content, blog posts. People do videos, they join webinars, they run events, they organize local meetups, they're ambassadors, they create technology, they do all of these kinds of things. That's what most companies aren't doing right now. That's where we'll be in 5 years.
That's fascinating. I think that this collaborative contribution piece is, I mean, everybody wants to feel useful and everybody wants to be connected. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But giving them a place to connect and contribute is so valuable when you put those two things together,
Right.
because it also sort of levels the playing field, and it allows people to move out of their own insecurities and into, well, I did that and that was good and I added value there. And I think that that's
Mm.
incredibly powerful and valuable. And I know that Joseph Gordon-Levitt had a show on TV that was a
Yeah.
collaborative community thing. I don't know what it was about
That was
anymore.
it. That was so Hit Record, which was that TV show, was them showing productions from the community that I just mentioned, which is called Hit
Right,
Record. It's really
right.
cool. Yeah.
And I don't know whether it's still going, or I
Oh
know it's
yeah.
not a TV show anymore, is it?
Right.
But
It
the
yeah,
community is still going,
it is, and it's
and
huge. Yeah.
and it was global. And so
Yeah.
again, people watching and listening might go, well, yeah, but I'm not Joseph Gordon-Levitt. I know he wrote in your book for you, and he added quality to that. But again, it feels like, I just want to sort of come at it from other people's point of view. It could feel like, well, I'm not a celebrity, or I'm not
Yeah.
a celebrity brand like Harley Davidson, because Harley Davidson, just so everybody who knows, was has been the number one community-based brand in the world for many, many years before all the digital stuff. And
Mm.
that's why it was the number one tattoo of a brand in the world, because you wanted to be a member of the club,
Yeah.
right? And so you were, you're a CEO and you're very buttoned up, but in the gym, somebody saw that you have a Harley D on your tattoo on your shoulder, and you're like, oh yeah, I'm one of the gang, and it's that belonging stuff that's, I mean, we're wired for it.
Yeah.
So, but that's the desire to be part of something that's like, yeah, it's got an image to it. And then there's oh, well, I'm in this group with Joseph Gordon-Levitt, as opposed to I'm in this group with Fred Bloggs,
Yeah.
or Susie Cream Cheese.
Yeah.
Who cares?
Yeah.
So does it need that celebrity?
No, not at all. And I mean, there are, there are there are the large examples of communities like the ones I just mentioned, but there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of examples all over the world of small communities that are offering a lot of value. Um, and I think a big chunk of what makes them the ones that succeed actually focuses on, what you spend so much time talking about, Dov, which is really grabbing that potential that's inside of people and bringing it out to the surface and making it shine. And what does every great leader able to do? They're able to do that. They're able to see potential in other people. So I think if you're let's say you're running a small business and you create a little online community for people to come and join, and you see that first person come in, like the person coming into your party, like I mentioned earlier on,
Right.
and you see that they've got enthusiasm and they've got insight and they've got some interesting experience, mentoring and channeling that into that shared space. Once you start doing that, again, people mimic those leadership principles, so other people will start doing that. But then that shared space, even if you've only got 5 or 6 people there that bring those interesting ideas, becomes a valuable place. Like I have a Slack channel, for example, with 10 friends that I've known for years. And I love spending time there because they're 10 people they're not just friends, but they've got really interesting ideas. They're always talking about the news and what's going on in tech and whatever else. So, but it's about channeling that potential into the shared space as opposed to just between one person and the other person. So you absolutely do not need, a famous actor or a large brand to be able to do this. And in fact, many brands have become successful because they've been able to build the community around it.
Mm-hmm.
Like Linux that I mentioned right at the beginning of this conversation.
Yep.
Was created by a Finnish guy in his basement at university. Nobody knew anything about it. It powers the world now. He's been on Time
Yep.
magazine.
Yeah, it's
It was the
amazing.
community that made that happen.
Yeah, and then back in the day, if somebody said you're going to build software for free and you're going to work with people all over the world, you're like, yeah,
You're
whatever.
crazy. Come on.
Right? Come on, right? And that's exactly what happened, and that's what's happened with so many things, right? So
Yeah.
it's really quite fascinating. So this is one of those things that I see personally. I see as is
Yeah.
going to be sort of every day. It, if we get in our time machine and we move 10 years forward, we're going to look and go, everybody has one, right? But at this point, it's like, I don't know what to do, and it seems kind of out there. When you first, like you said, you've been doing this in one form or another for about 20 years. When you first started, what blocked you from being able to really grasp this and embrace this? Because everybody looks at the outcome and says, "Oh, yeah, well, if I had Jono's knowledge, well, Jono's got 20 years, mate, and guess what?
Right.
He's got a lot of scars and bumps on his knees from falling over and making a dog's breakfast of it and getting back up." So, what were some of the things that you personally struggled with, and how did you overcome those?
Looking back, and I didn't know this at the time, if there's one thing, and I don't know about your background when you were when you were growing up in the UK, but
when I was being beaten up in the UK,
right?
Was that a Freudian slip? Because that's actually true, and I'm guessing with a name like Bacon, it happened to you too.
Yeah, people thought that was an amusing name, shall we say? I mean, I didn't have any exposure to any of this stuff. Like my dad never referred to himself as an entrepreneur, but he is. He couldn't say his alphabet when he was 16, and he got his degree in criminology from Cambridge when he was 65. And a lot of things happened between those 2 points.
Yeah.
So I didn't really grow up around like living here in the Bay Area. There's kids are growing up with entrepreneurs and business and all the rest of it. I didn't have any of that. What was fascinating to me was I've always had this kind of fascination with people. But I didn't have any resources. There was no books on this. There was no training courses. There was no people that I knew. I think where I feel very fortunate is for some reason inside of my brain, if I don't know something, I'm not perturbed by it. And I'm fascinated by it, and I want to learn everything that I can about it. But I didn't have any information available to me. So one thing that I struggled was, where do you practice? Like, how do you go and learn about building communities when you don't have a community? And what actually ended up happening was it's
actually business parkour is what it is.
Yeah,
right.
That's exactly what it is.
It's business parkour. You got to go do it, and you're going to fall over, and you're going to get mangled. You're going to look like a superstar when you do it, but you got to get mangled first because nobody's doing it.
Exactly, and it is going to suck. And I actually worry a little bit, without taking us too off track, about. I think some people are averse to adversity, and they want to protect themselves and put themselves in a bubble away from it. And it's like, I'm the opposite of that. Although I really only understood that about 10 years ago. I was like everybody. I had a fear of failure. I didn't want to screw up. And when I started getting a bit of a public reputation, when I started within tech, I didn't want to come across as weak or not knowing what I was doing. So I didn't measure anything. I just went completely on gut feel. And that was a huge mistake that I made. Because when I started measuring things, I became much more aware of what was going on. And I learned much faster. But I just had a lack of mentoring, a lack of I never even heard the word mentoring until I moved to the US, I think.
Right.
So moving over here and seeing this culture was just, I was like, wow, I wish, on one hand, I wish I'd grown up with that. But on the other hand, I'm glad that I didn't, because I think it gave me, I'm a bit of a brawler when it comes to getting things done. Not from a social perspective, just like one way or another, this is getting done.
Right.
My knees are going to get scuffed up, but it'll get done. So that's the thing that I wish I'd had a bit more guidance and mentoring, but I didn't have any of that.
So what was the turning point for you?
This is going to sound horribly cheesy. A big chunk of it was meeting my wife. Like, my wife is currently, she's the chief operating officer at GitHub. And she was running a little startup when we met. And I'll never forget watching her running this little business, and when she didn't know how to do something, she'd call people up and ask them questions. I was like, what a novel idea that is. And I just never did that. I just tried to figure it out by myself. Um, and when I started seeing just how much she was growing from having conversations and being very vulnerable about what wasn't going very well, I was thinking, well, maybe I should start doing that. And that really changed my perspective a lot. And then I started just reading more, like reading books, like The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People changed my approach to working completely.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and just meeting interesting, like meeting you and meeting various other people. Like, I think these kinds of conversations really, they manifest in this patchwork of ideas and perspectives. Um, so I think if I hadn't have met her, I'd be living in Wolverhampton in the UK. I'd be happy and I'd be doing what I want to do, but I wouldn't be anywhere near where I am today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting because what you just boiled it down to is relationship.
Yeah.
And essentially, that's what community is.
Yeah.
Building communities is facilitating relationships.
Yeah.
And in those relationships, you facilitate collaboration and you facilitate value and connection and all those kinds of things. But it's still relationship building. And
Yeah.
that is the key to it. And just as you just said, you would not be where you are today without your wife. I know certainly I wouldn't without
Mm.
my bride.
Yeah.
But I can also probably pinpoint another dozen relationships that are like that have
Yeah.
moved me forward incrementally at different points in my life. And some of them, I will be very clear, have been painful.
Mm.
And I think that that's the other thing when you talked about people being averse to adversity. Don't be averse to adversity, because the adversity will be actually the thing that's given you the greatest skill set you could possibly have in what it is you're doing. Because sometimes it's like, oh, I know not to do that anymore. I'm not having those kinds of relationships anymore. Right? Because I
Yeah.
really don't like that emotional or mental or physical bloody nose. I'm not interested in that. So I'm out. So now
I
I know what kind of relationships I want. So I think what you're doing is very powerful from that point of view, because it is about adding value. It is about growing business, and it's important that it is led, and it is important that we all get involved in that. But it also addresses a basic psychology of human beings in that we are relational, and we need to remember that. And I've written a piece on how the universe is essentially social, that everything in the universe, and I'm not talking woo-woo, I'm
yeah.
talking about physics, I'm talking about quantum physics, I'm talking about epidemiology, I'm talking about epigenetics, I'm talking about neurons. We are social beings. And once we get that, we can stop all this resistance, because whether you get in and build a community or not, somebody's going to, and the person who builds a community inside of your industry is likely to steal your lunch.
Right.
Is that a
Yeah.
fair comment?
Absolutely. I'll give you one clear example of this, and I actually write about this on the first page of People Power because I think it sets the stage for the journey ahead. When I was at Canonical, which is a company that has a huge technology platform called Ubuntu, and I was growing the Ubuntu community. I'd been there for about 6 or 7 months, and I got an email from this kid called Abayomi, who was based somewhere in Africa. I forget where he was. And he told me this story that he would do chores around his village to earn money. And then he'd walk 2.5 hours to his local town, and he'd spend that money on an hour's worth of internet access. That's generally what he could afford. And he would spend that time contributing to Ubuntu. And I remember when I got that email, a bit of a light bulb went off of what's fascinating about, sure, that's, you can imagine the soaring violins behind that story, right? But
Yeah.
what's fascinating to me about that is he felt so passionate and so part of something that he was willing to go that extra mile physically and, like figuratively and literally, because it made him feel like his existence, his life was more purposeful, was, had more meaning to it.
Meaning, yeah.
And I think that, to your point of like, everybody wants that. Everybody who's watching this, everybody who's listening to this wants that sense of meaning, wants that sense of purpose. This has been well studied, well documented. And I think communities are one way to do that. I don't think they're their only way, but they're a very powerful way when they're done right. And it's finding that meaning, that purpose for your business, for your brand, for your company, whatever it might be, is a big chunk of then defining your audiences and providing that value.
Yeah, it's more than, it's a contribution that adds value, that creates the meaning. It's very powerful. Jono, we are out of time. Can you believe it? We already flew through. It was great conversation, mate. Likewise. And I really want to thank you for taking the time to be with us.
Oh, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.
It has indeed. Before we finish, there's two things I want you to do. I want you to tell our audience where they can find out more about you and all your resources. But before we do that, we always like to ask our guests to share something, some practical guidance that will allow our audience to go away and put what you say in action, preferably in the next 10 minutes, but certainly within the next 48 hours. What would that one practical piece be?
So what I would recommend you do to get started is, first of all, sit down with a piece of paper and a pen and say, when you think of a community, what is the goal? What is the purpose of it? What do you want it to do? It could be education, guidance, relationship building, all of those different pieces. And then think of one audience that you want to focus on and write down, what are the 5 things that suck about their life? What do they struggle with? For example, if it's engineers, it's figuring out technology and deploying it and using it. If it's business leaders, it could be, unnecessary bureaucracy or dealing with staffing issues. Think about things that they struggle with, and then start formulating 5 more bullet points of things that you feel like you could offer in that shared space that can relieve those pain points. And then just pick one of them and go and give it a go. That's what I would recommend.
Pick one of what?
Pick one of those pieces of value that you feel like you can offer. So let's say, okay, my audience struggle with picking up how to use a particular piece of technology, for example. Okay, well, I'm going to create a place where people can go and ask questions and get help, and just go and start there and start measuring. But you sit down with that piece of paper and a pen, no laptop, no phone, take your smartwatch off, and just be there with your thoughts and carve out that audience and that value first. And I think if you feel any ambiguity towards what's on that piece of paper, then you need to think about who your audience is more. Don't start doing any technical stuff until you've figured out what's on that piece of paper first. That's what I would recommend.
Solid advice. Thank you, mate. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
So please tell our audience, our viewers, our listeners, where they can find out more about you and all your wonderful resources, including the book, of course.
Yes. I mean, probably the best place is my website, jonobacon.com, jonobacon.com. The book is called People Powered. You can find it in all good bookshops and probably some bad ones as well. If people go to jonobacon.com/pack, PACK, you can pop in your email and I'll send you a couple of free chapters, PDF chapters as well as audiobook chapters. And then I also send out just a lot of email best practice and guide and tips and tricks and everything. I don't spam people with sales junk. I believe that people want value. So I try to practice what I preach with my email. So that may be
fabulous.
Yep.
And we will, of course, post that URL inside of the show notes, including all the links to Jono's social media platforms and where you can reach out to him and all the rest of it. So again, we want to thank Jono Bacon for being with us and bringing out awareness to the power of community. And you remember that you can hang out with other conscious leaders and you can chat about this episode that you've been listening to or any past episodes inside of our Facebook and LinkedIn groups. Simply look for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast. It doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees and your customers don't understand what gives your company meaning, you're only working on a fraction of your capability. To find out more about how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or leadership strategist for yourself or your organization, go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com, because unified meaning, or as we like to call it, finding a dragonfire, is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for all individuals and companies. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about how you need to build a community that where people not only get value, but can actually contribute so they feel like they're part of it, where they want to belong. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your dragonfire to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.